Alright, ladies and gentlemen, so I didn't exactly plan initially to do more React content within a week of doing it last time, as normally I stagger these by a month or a few months, usually, to be fair, especially when I get really busy with, well, whatever we're streaming at the time. But either way, my thought on doing this was twofold. First of all, there were a couple of videos in the docket last week that we weren't able to get to, so I felt it makes sense to make time for them specifically, especially since one of them is a bit on the longer side, and as a result of that, I keep throwing it into the back burner and have been doing so consistently for months, so it's about time I took care of that. I am aware that a bunch more stuff got thrown in after last week's stream, but you know what? We'll at least see to the two that have been in there for a while. So, that's one thing. For another, well, as you can probably tell, we've got 3 videos on the docket based on my browser right now, and yeah, there's one in particular that I noticed when scrolling through the Unscripted channel's recommended feed after I had finished last week's stream, just within an hour of it, really, where I thought, oh, that's an interesting title and thumbnail. Okay, I'll play ball. I'm curious now. Let's see what you got. So, yeah, I'll be very curious to see what kind of arguments are brought forth there. But we'll talk more about that once we get to it. First on the docket, though, a smaller video on Mario Kart World. At the time this was recommended, it was framed as, hey, this might help for the review you're making, which I ended up not watching it because for the purpose of what I was reviewing and for the focus that I was, well, as for my review's focus, it wasn't strictly necessary for me to know too much about the NPC behavior for effectively the obstacles when you're going down one of the straightaways. What mattered more to me was the AI behavior for the enemy racers when you're going up against the bots. So my thought was, you know what? We'll save this for a React stream, and now you're getting it here. So let's go ahead and take a look.
When you're driving around in Mario Kart World, you're going to run into a lot of other drivers, and if you're anything like me, it's usually in a head-on manner. But after that...
Well, to be fair, it's not nearly as punishing anymore, so you can typically get away with it.
You typically keep going where you were going, they keep going where they were going, and you never see each other again. But just where is it that they're going? Where do the NPCs in Mario Kart World actually go? To find...
Well, how exactly are you framing this, I wonder? Because there's a matter of, do they despawn at any point? Do they actually follow a particular routine? That I'd be curious about. Because with how big the world is, especially with the Knockout Tour, I'd be very curious to know if you just followed one around, would it actually have a set routine for all of them? I guess we'll find out.
I decided to start following this yellow toad in a blue car, and the answer was actually a bit more interesting than I initially expected. You see, in older Mario Kart games, the answer is simple. The tracks are usually just big loops that end where they begin, so the drivers are ultimately going to be going to the same place you are, which is
Fair enough.
nowhere. They're just driving in circles along the track until the race ends, and they don't even do it that fast. Because the goal of the NPC drivers in this game isn't to race, it's just to be an obstacle to the player. Now, there are some courses where drivers can exit or enter the course partway through, but since we the player can't follow them, they still don't actually need to be going anywhere. They can simply drive out of sight along a predetermined path and despawn.
But the difference with this one is that, well, with Mario Kart World's interconnected world, where exactly do you spawn or despawn or what have you? So, is there an actual path they have to follow? Let's see.
Purpose in life fulfilled. Here in Mario Kart World, however, we are no longer stuck to any particular track. We can go anywhere we want in this wide open world, and
reality can be whatever I want. Come on, someone had to make the joke.
More importantly, the NPC drivers can no longer simply drive out of sight and despawn. We can follow them for as long as we want and see just what it is they're doing no matter how far they go. And almost immediately after I started following this toad, it became apparent that NPC drivers in Mario Kart World were going to be a bit more sophisticated than in any previous game, because after only about 30 seconds of being followed, this yellow toad suddenly took a hard right turn off the road entirely.
Wait, what? What? Huh? What, did it know you were following it or something? Or is it just needing to be present for... hang on, why did it do that?
before absolutely fucking flooring it. Then making a sick jump over this stream and continuing across this field so goddamn fast that I nearly lost track of him a couple of times in the process. Not every Toad in this game may be a racer, but they can still all drive like it. He's even
Okay then.
as good at avoiding obstacles as most of the other racers you'll see in the game too.
Well, you say that while gathering footage of you intentionally crashing into stuff, but never mind me.
This little sprint across the field immediately fascinated me. For the developers at Nintendo, having NPC drivers follow predetermined paths around the open world's road system would have been the easiest solution as far as game design goes. You'll
Okay, and that's what I defaulted to initially, so... Well, clearly that hasn't happened, so I'd be curious to know how they actually work then.
only see them for a few seconds at a time anyway, so most players wouldn't even notice if the NPCs were just driving around in big circles. In fact, that sort of behavior still is in Mario Kart World to a certain degree. For example,
Okay.
I followed this tour bus around for 30 minutes, and all it ever did was lapse around the Star Lake without so much as even switching lanes, which during normal races is fine, because all this tour bus needs to do is serve as an obstacle to players while they drive down this road. This field, however, is not used in any race. There is no gameplay reason for this Toad to be careening through an empty field like this. It's not serving as an obstacle like the tour bus. The Toads will just do that. For some reason, the developers made a deliberate decision to give drivers like this Toad here a more unique and unpredictable driving pattern.
It even used the turn signal now that I look at that footage again. I was wondering about that before the hard right turn as well. Hang on. Let's see if I can go back to that real quick. So we're at 249. So let's see.
Drivers
Yeah, you can see it using its turn signal
in Mario Kart World were
before
going to be
veering off. That's neat. So it even warned you to an extent, but still, neat.
made a deliberate decision to give drivers like this Toad here a more unique and unpredictable driving pattern. Now you may be thinking, maybe that cut across the field was just part of a weird loop they set up for the Toads to do. Maybe it just gets them from one part of the course to another. But here's the thing, after following around this Toad for a couple more hours, I can confidently say that's not the case here. In fact, he never even drove off the road again. Instead, he did something
Really?
even more interesting than driving across a field, at least eventually. Most of those 2
Well, eventually. I mean, you said 2 hours, so I'm assuming that it's a lot of dead air, but hey, props to you for taking the time and being patient on that count. I would have given up after half an hour.
hours I spent tailing him, he actually did just drive around in circles, but never along what felt like a predetermined path. He drove to Choco Mountain, back to Moo Moo Farms, onwards past Peaches Stadium towards Cheep Cheep Falls, and then finally getting as far as Dandelion Depths before turning back and returning to where I first met him. For a while, he just kept doing loops like this. But importantly, he never did the same loop twice. He would
Really?
just drive out to 1 or 2 nearby courses along seemingly random routes before slowly looping back towards Moo Moo Farms. After
Okay, so what it sounds like then is that there is not strictly a predetermined path, but that there are commonalities that maybe there's a bit of randomness involved, and the randomness that time just went completely haywire, perhaps? I'd be curious to know how QA was done for that. That sounds painful.
After 4 or 5 of these loops, I was about to call it quits and just say that all the NPCs in this game do is loop around and occasionally do some insane off-road stunting. But that's when our little psycho did something interesting. He drove back to Peaches Stadium once again, but instead of continuing down the road, he took a right here, where he did something I never thought I would see a Toad do. He parked his car and got out. The Toads in this
Oh.
game can actually get out of their cars. And not only
Okay, huh. Fascinating.
only that, but after a minute or 2 of wandering around the parking lot, he walked over to a warp pipe and actually got into it. I mean, he didn't actually get into it, he just kind of faded out of reality in front of it, but
But yeah, it looks like in that case they do have a despawn mechanic for the particular toads, so I guess this is meant to be a place where the toads can go to despawn, as it were. Huh. Interesting. So I'd be curious to know how much of this behavior is present for the race component, especially for Knockout Tour. It'd be very difficult to check for that, but I wonder if this is specific to free roam, given that in order to try and create some visual variety, given how little other variety there is tragically outside of the P-switches, but never mind me, just to try and create some variety to where as you're moving along the road and trying to figure out where you want to go next, there's at least some variation between that. Fascinating.
that's probably just the developer's way of symbolizing a toad entering the pipe. Actual animations are expensive to make. They probably just couldn't do that here. Now, when I tried to follow him, I was just shot out of the top of the pipe and onto the track above, and he definitely wasn't there. So where exactly he went from here is a bit of a mystery, but I have what I feel is a pretty reasonable hypothesis. I believe that this area is parking for all the people watching the races in Peach's Stadium, and that this warp pipe is how you get into the building from this parking lot.
That's not the worst idea.
After all, pipes that split up and go in multiple directions are a pretty well-established part of the Mario universe. So the concept of a pipe that both lets people into the stadium and spits cars onto the track above isn't all that far-fetched. The idea that our little yellow friend was just driving to the stadium to see a race is actually pretty likely in my eyes. Not sure why he drove around outside the stadium for 2+ hours first, but whatever. Maybe he had
You're the one who followed him. Can you really say anything?
time to burn before the race started. Who really
Again, you're the one who followed him.
knows what goes on behind those vacant-looking eyes. But
Fair
on
enough.
top of this discovery, while I was sitting in this parking lot, I also noticed that while there were other cars pulling into the parking lot, not everyone was here for the race. There were a good number of cars that would instead just park for a minute or two and then drive out the same way they came in. For NPCs in this game, parking does not need to be the end of the journey like it was for our little yellow friend. Sometimes they're just taking a little break, presumably before another 3 hours of jumping rivers and driving around in circles. And although gone, my toad friend did leave me with one other question. Since toads can get out of their cars after arriving at their destinations, will any of the toads you find walking around the world ever get into a car and drive somewhere else? Well,
Fair question to ask, because presumably if they're going to take one of the toads out of the free roam aspect to where you won't encounter them just randomly exploring in the world, they've got to make sure that there's something out there, so is there any point where that does occur? Fair question to ask.
well, I looked into this too, and the answer is kinda. Did I ever see a toad get into their own personal vehicle and drive away? No. No, I did not. But while I was stalking toads around Crown City, I did see one get onto a bench at a bus stop and just kind of sit there for a while. So naturally, I sat with him while he uncomfortably stared at me every few seconds.
Well, of course it did, because it notices you're there, and so it's curious, and it'll presumably follow you if you're driving around, so of course it did. From a game design standpoint, that works, because people aren't likely to do that unless they're crazy and making a YouTube video. Hi!
Though I was somehow intruding on something. Like, have you never seen a fish with a dumpy waiting for the bus before? Calm
Okay, fair joke.
down, dude. Eventually, a tour bus, the very same kind of tour bus that I followed for a half hour before while it did nothing, actually made a stop at the bus stop, at which point both the toad and the shy guy waiting on the bench actually got up and got onto the bus. You could even see him through the window sitting in the back there. It would have been real easy.
Hang on, can I rewind that footage? Was
At
he there
which point,
before?
both
He was not there before.
the
Fascinating.
toad and the shy guy waiting on the bench actually
Actually, yeah, there's a shy guy
got
that
up
looks like
and
it
got
spawned in as
onto
well.
the bus. You could even see him through the window sitting.
Oh yeah, there he goes. Yeah, you see that for that little bit frame where it does the toad slowly fades out there and fades into the bus. Okay, cool.
In the back there. It would have been real easy for the developers to make the bus windows opaque and hide any of the riders, allowing the NPCs to just despawn from the world upon entering the bus so that the game didn't have to track them anymore. But no, that toad is actually on that tour bus going somewhere, touring presumably, and the bus did in fact seem to go on a little tour around the immediate area. First, we went south to Whistletop Summit before heading back through Crown City, across this massive bridge all the way to the safari, and then once we were done with that, back to Crown City before turning north, going through this tunnel, across 2 lanes of traffic and a double yellow line, also that we could briefly drive by the Choco Mountains and Peach Stadium before immediately heading back to Crown City. I feel like they could have routed this tour better. Who's in charge of this thing? Is it
Well, I mean, it's Nintendo we're talking about here. They gotta keep things consistent-ish from a game balance standpoint.
Rosalina? Rosalina, what is this? We could make such a better route than this. But that's not what we're here to figure out today. Here it is, though. On
Alrighty then. Fancy.
the way back to Crown City, though, the bus did make a second stop to let out every single one of its passengers, save for the one green toad I decided to follow initially. I'm not sure why he stayed
Including the shy guy by the looks of it. Interesting.
on there, but I'm pretty sure he ended up regretting his decision, because after driving halfway to Mario Bros. Stadium, the bus driver suddenly decided, It is time, and proceeded to turn back to Crown City without even visiting another location this time, where our Toad, after experiencing 50 minutes of the worst goddamn bus tour of his life, finally decided to get off in the outskirts of the city, and he's missing his backpack. He doesn't have the backpack he got on with. He left it on the bus. This is not a good day for our little friend. But this
I have questions then, but then again, I don't think Nintendo would have necessarily expected us to go following these around, though I wonder, you'd think somebody would given that, but well, here we are.
day's not over yet. And after narrowly avoiding both a bullet bill and another wayward psychopath, he was going into the city proper.
Where'd you come from?
And we are gonna find out just where it is he's going. Now, following him is not a hard process, but the pedestrians in this game are very slow. And not just because they're not driving, but instead because they feel the need to completely stop moving after every 10 feet of walking. On top of that, whenever you're within a certain range of them, they feel the need to keep turning around and wave at us every few seconds. Which felt kind of weird at first until I realized that kart racing is pretty much this island's main form of entertainment. So kart racers like Cheep GP are probably major celebrities. Like,
well, close enough to it anyway.
Imagine you were walking down the street when you suddenly realize that Sabrina Carpenter has been stalking you for the last 55 minutes. You'd probably be pretty excited too.
I'd probably be nervous isn't the right word. I'd probably be more concerned of, okay, surely you have better things to do, but never mind me.
Problem though, whenever this Toad isn't walking forward, I'm not finding out where he's going. But I quickly figured out that as long as I stayed about 50 to 60 feet away from him, he didn't notice I was there. Or at the very least, didn't care enough to wave at me anymore, allowing me to continue observing his progress uninterrupted. And after following him around for a couple blocks, he went into that restaurant to get a delicious Yoshi burger after a long day of touring around the island. And it wasn't just him and that other Toad either, because after just a couple of minutes, a third Toad and 5 Shy Guys also came around the corner and entered that very same burger joint. Now,
well, that's a popular destination.
Given the sheer number of people walking here just to enter this one building, what I think is going on here as far as actual game mechanics are concerned is that this restaurant is a designated point at which pedestrians can despawn, similar to how cars will despawn behind off-ramps in previous Mario Karts. And this
Yep, that makes sense.
This is actually pretty clever. After all, the game can only keep track of so many Toads and Shy Guys at once. And so long as buses keep bringing new ones into town, older Toads and Shy Guys do need to be despawned somehow in order to keep the game from lagging. But
one does wonder how they're spawning in, though, in that case.
Making this happen at the front door to a restaurant or at the entrance to a stadium rather than just the middle of the road helps to make it seem much more natural. Now when they despawn, it's not like there's some digital ghost whose existence can just cease in an instant with no explanation.
Also, you're gonna get that Peach Medallion?
Instead, their existence is now ceasing in an instant because they were going to get a nice juicy burger. Either that or they're all applying to rent out the empty office building next door. I'm not sure why the first thing you would do after going on a tour bus all day would be to rent out some local office space, but
I mean, what else are you gonna do with it?
You know, I also don't know why all these guys are throwing hammers and bombs onto the road while they drive along, so you know what, maybe things just work differently in the Mushroom Kingdom, I don't know. And
I mean, have you seen this place?
Speaking of things that work a little differently, every once in a while as you drive down the road, you'll see a little Toad police officer, which is pretty interesting because A, it implies the existence of crime in Mario Kart World, and the thought of a Toad robbing a bank is inherently funny to me. B, throwing hammers out of the back.
Are you sure it's the Toads that are doing it? But to be fair, there's probably one psychopath Toad out there that is doing it, but never mind me.
Trucks and detonating explosives on the road is apparently not a crime here because the cops do not so much as a blink when they see someone doing either one of those things. And C, I don't think I've ever seen a cop car parked somewhere. So if they're never making any arrests or parking to get out of their car and go somewhere, then what exactly are these little piggies up to? Now you're probably thinking that this is the same situation as the first tour bus I followed, and you would mostly be correct. Mostly. When I started following around this police officer inside Crown City, the first thing I noticed is that he's not wearing a uniform. He's just a regular Toad in there. And the second thing I noticed is that the cop's driving pattern is largely the same as the tour bus. They'll just drive out to neighboring areas before returning to Crown City and then going to a different area. Rinse and repeat forever. But rather than sticking to the main roads and making brief drives through Crown City on the way to somewhere else like the tour buses do, the police officer will instead take extra time to drive down the less busy side roads of the city as well, which I never saw any of the buses do at all. And he did.
Fair enough. So they do at least vary things up a little bit as far as the driving pattern, but not enough to where it would be substantially different from a coding standpoint.
He didn't just do this once either. He did this every single time he came back to Crown City. Just run a little patrol along the back streets, looking for crime and then doing nothing about it when he found some. But I do think the fact that he actually patrols the back streets instead of just sticking to the main roads like the buses on their god-awful bus routes is actually pretty interesting. It's a small details most players wouldn't even notice, but the fact that they actually bothered adding it here is pretty impressive. They didn't have to make the cops go on patrols. There's no gameplay function for that at all, but it makes sense that they would, just like it makes sense that the buses would stick to their bus route without ever going deeper into the city, and just
Fair enough.
like it makes sense that Toads would drive to stadiums and go eat burgers. None of this was required to make Mario Kart a good racing game, but it goes a long way to help make the world feel just a little bit more realistic for those taking a closer look. And that kind of attention to detail will always be fascinating to me. And I have one final detail I noticed to end us off with. This one has less to do with what the NPCs in this game are doing, but it's interesting all the same. The
Alright.
Toad cops in this game keep their lights on at all times, which at first was really strange to me. Normally, cops only turn on their lights when they're responding to an emergency, and all the other drivers on the road have to pull over to let them pass. But no one in this game does that for these cops. In fact, he even stops and waits in traffic along with every other driver, so he's
Actually, wait, how have I only just now noticed that? What is that?
clearly not rushing to any emergency. His lights are just on. Now, at first I thought that this Toad might just be stupid and forgot to turn his lights off.
I mean, it is a Toad.
Until I remembered a very important detail about Mario Kart World. It was made in Japan, and it turns out that in Japan, the police don't only use their lights for emergencies like they do in the US. They
Wait,
turn
what?
them on whenever they're
It's common for police cars to have their red lights on even when not actively responding to an emergency. This practice is part of Actually, this looks like an AI thing, but never mind. So this practice is part of a visible policing strategy to deter crime and enhance awareness of law enforcement presence. Okay, so that makes sense. So yeah, that makes sense. So just acting as a physical deterrent rather than waiting for something to happen and then springing it on someone. Fair enough.
on active patrol, and keep them on for their entire shift, which I guess goes to show if you pay enough attention to little details in the game, not only can you learn a little bit more about the world you're playing in, but sometimes you also get to learn a little bit more about the world the developers making the game are living in as well. But that's
Fair
it for
enough.
today. Remember to like, comment, and subscribe for the algorithm, and a very special
Oh, hang on, did the button light up when he said subscribe? Am I the only one that saw that? I mean, to be fair, solid video. Wow, you got a lot of attention for that. Well played. Yeah, good video.
thank you to all of my supporters on Patreon. You're
Alrighty, so it looks like that'll be all. Anything important relating to that? Anything else to worry about? Alright, so just the usual Patreon shill. Alright, solid video. Interesting stuff. Interesting stuff. So, that was one video. Now, we get to what is, in my opinion, the main event. Let's talk Fire Emblem. Hey, come on, you saw it coming. You know I had to bring it up. So, give me 1 second. I'm going to... I probably should have pulled this up sooner. But I'm going to pull up what I saw that led me to be interested in this video. Let's see. It should be... Come on, it's got to be in here. Ah, here we are. Let's see. So, let me just pull up an image viewer real quick. So, this thumbnail over here, let me see if I can zoom in at all. It looks like there was one point where you had changed the thumbnail, although I don't think it's currently like that right now. This thumbnail is what I saw alongside the title. Because, is the writing in Fire Emblem really that bad? Alongside the text, why engage is overhated? Huh? That is a bold strategy, Cotton. Let's see if that works out. So my thought is, oh, you're going to tell me that the writing isn't that bad. And because of that, as soon as I saw that, I opened up the video, pulled up the transcript, and read the first 2 to 5 minutes or so and thought, okay, it seems that there is something of substance here and not just clickbait, as it were. So my thought was, you know what? We'll give it a good once-over as part of a React night. We'll give it a fair shot. And just to be clear, I do have the Restore YouTube Dislikes thing on, but this is an approximation and could be completely off, so just bear that in mind. So that does not speak to the quality of the video. We will see how it looks once we get further in. So either way, that in mind, I'll be very curious to see what kind of argument is made, because I know a little bit of what he's saying in at least the first couple of minutes, because I did read the transcript, and I do have some thoughts just based on what he says, but let's make sure that we give him the time to say that before I attempt to jump the gun. Alright, so let's see what you have for us, Nagapedia. If that is your real name. Yes, I am being cheeky, what do you ask? Let's do it!
If there is one thing us Fire Emblem fans are good at, it's disagreeing with each other.
I disagree. Wait, am I feeding into it? Okay. Fair point. We do like to argue about stuff, but that's literally any fandom. So, am I disproving your point by agreeing with you, or am I proving your point by disagreeing with the... That's always the fun part of making those kind of arguments. How do you respond to them, depending on how cheeky you want to be? Either way.
In most franchises, if there was one massive game that was way more successful than any other, has several storylines that are all executed well enough to the extent the game is considered quality, and has more than 100 hours of content, that would probably be universally considered the best game in the franchise.
But this is Fire Emblem we're talking about, and Three Houses did admittedly make significant changes to the formula by adding in a bunch of social elements, and from a game balance standpoint, setting almost every character, well, giving you a lot of characters to start out with and making them all generic classes rather than and then giving you the option to mix and match much more readily right from the start. Which, to be fair, from a game balance standpoint, probably not a wise option. And I've talked about that in a very long video over on the review channel.
And yet, there is a very significant contingent of the Fire Emblem community that doesn't consider Three Houses to be very good.
Well, it depends on what you're after on that, because what I think really attracted people to it, and what I hear from people in my personal life who have played it, well, people I just meet, is, and I think this is the case for a lot of the normie crowd as well, since this did get a lot of attention, is that the gameplay itself is good enough at a first blush, but what a lot of people remember from games like this isn't necessarily even the plot points, it's the characters. And it's because, well, the plot points you could quibble about, and I have some serious problems with a couple of points, but for the most part, the plot is good enough to where a normie isn't going to notice too much wrong with it in the moment, and the characterization is really what buoys it up above pretty much everything else. You can quibble about how the social elements can drag on a bit to where they had to put in a skip button. You can quibble about how all the maps are way too open-ended and can be too easily abused by Wyvern Lords, but from a story standpoint, it's hard to dispute how good the characterization is, and that buoys everything up.
Hell, how many game series do you know where there is a relatively commonly held opinion that the Japanese exclusive title from nearly 30 years ago is actually the best game?
I can't name something off the top of my head, but this is the internet we're talking about. There is bound to be that opinion somewhere.
I can name you exactly one, and that is Fire Emblem. And yet, there is one thing we can seemingly all agree on. Fire Emblem Engage's writing is bad.
It is. Well, let me be more specific. There are serious flaws that destroy what otherwise could have been really good.
Terrible. God awful. Saw me done. Now, whether that means the game in its entirety is also bad is something we as a community continue to fight on.
Yep, there's going to be a lot of fighting over that, because from a gameplay standpoint, you can quibble about the Tempest Trials giving very little reward. You can quibble about the other skirmish matches not really having a lot of substance either. But for the most part, the gameplay, when you're actually in the chapters and paralogs, that part, from a gameplay standpoint, yeah, that stuff is usually pretty good. I think there's, 2 maps that I have a major problem with? And even then, that's more personal preference instead of design issue. Although, to be fair, in my Maddening run, I haven't gotten past Chapter 22 because I've been stalled out on it and been focused on way too many other things. And Silksong arrives next week, so I'm going to be even more distracted once that shows up. But either way, so my memory of those chapters is probably lacking, and what I've noticed in my Maddening run is that I'm starting to rely on the same or similar strategies now that my builds have come into play, such as letting Panette just crit every last one of them. But still, hard mode First Blush gameplay's stellar. One of the best turn-based strategy games I've played.
But at least we all seem to agree Engage's writing isn't. Or is it?
Well, this is what I'd be curious. I need to hear what exactly he says on this before I can refute it, because I remember him making an argument that I thought was interesting in the first 2 minutes, so let's see what he says.
Because, yes, I am also a Fire Emblem fan, and therefore I must disagree. To an extent.
To an extent. That's what I think I noticed, because he isn't just being the negative... Well, he isn't just being a contrarian. He seems willing to admit that there are legitimate issues.
The writing in Fire Emblem Engage is underrated. Still not great, even terrible at certain points. But
yeah, at certain points, as in the key plot points. We'll get to that.
But I do think people are generally too negative about its writing quality.
I disagree.
In order to kind of make sense of it all and highlight where I agree with the common sentiment and disagree with it, I've divided the grand topic that is the writing into 4 categories. The plot, the tone, the presentation, and the character writing.
Well, let's bring that up real quick.
The 4 categories.
So,
the plot.
So let's bring this up real quick. Depending on... Well, there are 2 arguments that you can make there are 2 ways that you can approach this. One way is to say, arguably all of this is encompassed by writing. All of it. Because when you look... Well, think about it in terms of writing a novel. When you're writing a novel, everything is literally written out. I know, shock and horror. Such a brilliant revelation. But point being, the fact that you have an idea, okay, the world is named Elios, and it's going to have these 4 nations. Okay, is that considered writing? Yes, I would consider it to be so. So, I want Firene to be a land of abundance, that is just covered in greenery, with the people there being a more peaceful sort. Is that writing? Depending on your definition, it could be just window dressing, but I think it is fair to consider that part of the writing as well. So that's one approach you can take. And with respect to my critiques of Fire Emblem Engage, admittedly, not all of them are based on writing quality. You can largely bundle my critiques of Engage into 3 categories. Subjective disdain for the characters and tone, which, purely subjective, not something the game needs to change. Significant points where there are wasted potential, as well as legitimate writing flaws, such as Chapter 11. Oh, let's lock you into a cathedral to justify Chapter 10's battle, and then let you waltz out after depowering you and surrounding you on all sides. Yeah, totally. That's totally gonna work.
The tone, the presentation, and the character writing.
Because all of those can technically fall into writing, so I'd be curious to know how you approach them.
In many Engage discussions, I've kinda seen people throw these all on one pile and talk about them like they're all one and the same, which...
They are very closely related, but I will grant you that they are not the same.
I guess to an extent is fair.
Okay, good.
After all, they all combine to form the writing we experience. At the same
Okay, good. We're on the same page. Excellent.
time, I think there is a wild difference in quality between them in Engage's case, to the point some elements of it get flack that I don't think is entirely deserved.
Well, and that's why I bring up the different kinds of criticism that I levy against the game, because me seeing Tamara's introduction and utterly hating it isn't a writing problem, it's a me not liking it problem. That's purely subjective, even though from a writing standpoint, it makes total sense why she acts that way once that you have all the pieces. That's just me being a curmudgeon that doesn't like the tone of the character writing in general. That's just me not liking it, not because it's bad. Well, to use a word like bad, but you get the point.
Let's start with something that probably bothered a lot of people, arguably more so due to the outside factors than the intrinsic quality of Engage. The tone.
I'd be very curious to see how you qualify that, because what do you mean by outside factors?
The tone of Fire Emblem Engage is weird.
Okay, that is a fair thing to mention, because I think I did see a little bit of this, and I guess to preempt this a bit, you have a sheer contrast between Sombron just coming out of nowhere and saying, "Oh, Hyacinth, you look delicious, nom," and then contrast that with a chapter or two later, you have Figado just being Figado.
It's definitely different from most Fire Emblem games, and at several points can feel unsure about what it even wants to be. On one hand,
and we even have a dev interview that says they were looking to appeal to a broader audience with this one, so that is not at all surprising.
you have characters whose designs are very out there, very colorful, vibrant, bright, and far from realistic. Even the characters that are meant to come from the gritty Illusia.
Hang on, I need to pull up exactly my script for this. Hang on, I need to bring up my script for what exactly I say on this one. And this is going to be in the part 1 video, so hopefully this will be done within 6 months or so. Hang on, where is this? So this would be chapter 6. Where is it? No, chapter 7. Sorry, my bad. Okay, skip that section. I do a lot of character discussion on this one because Alchrist's introduction really bothered me. But let's see. Alright, so here it is. But never mind. So this is pulled directly from my script for the video I'm working on. But never mind that, we've got our obligatory combat encounter this chapter. And this time, as we're escorted to the Brodian capital, the bridge we're taking just so happens to be occupied by Elusian forces led by, okay, what the hell is that outfit? Are you dressed for ball or for battle? Why the hell would you give such bright colors to a faction whose lands are primarily snow-colored? Why do you sound like you're barely out of elementary school? And why do you look like you're still in middle school? I'm really gonna hate you, aren't I? And the script carries on from there, but also, whose idea was it to conflate Q with eccentric? I want names. Ugh, I did not like Hortensia at first blush, and honestly, I still don't like her characterization, but that's beside the point. But why? There's writing that goes into it to where I can't outright refute it, but why?
Have design choices that make you do a double take. They're not exactly grounded in reality.
And then right next to her is Lucina. It weren't already enough of a jarring contrast.
Not to mention, you have the core element of the emblems, past characters returning, which in and of itself gives Engage a very different tone from the rest of the series.
Yep, they spend way too much time on the emblems. If you're going to do the paralogs with them, involve the other characters, please.
Easily making this the least grounded Fire Emblem we have ever seen.
I wouldn't
On
go
the
that
opposite end
far,
of the
but... Well, actually, that might be fair. You know what? That actually may be a fair assessment. I need to play more of the Fire Emblem games.
There are several moments in-game where Engage appears to treat itself very seriously.
Well, it's funny because when I was looking over this scene, writing the script for it, I realized, you know, if Vale had just stopped... Well, if Vale had noticed Sombron right there, as Sombron starts monologuing, and just hurriedly handed Alear the emblem ring, this, as we're seeing, wouldn't be happening. There is... Past chapter 17... Well, from chapter 17 and onward, this plot is literally an idiot plot, because the only reason that events happen as they do are because Zephyr and Vale are complete and total morons. And Alear's not much better, to be fair, because, oh, you know what I'm gonna do? When Sombron is about to just utterly wreck Vale, I'm not gonna try dragging her away from it. No, I'm gonna block it with just a sword. Yeah, totally nothing else. Yeah, I totally can afford to die! This game has problems.
The deaths of Lumera, Marnie, Zephyr, and Gris all feel like they expect you to be bawling in front of your Switch, but...
Yep, and that is... The Lumera death especially is probably the biggest point of wasted potential, because that scene, in hindsight, does not feel earned at all. Because Alear has known Lumera for all of a day, at most, and just knowing just knowing Lumera for that time, getting my pronouns mixed up, just knowing Lumera for that time is enough to make Alear bawl his eyes out, just because Lumera stated that she is his mother, and was being overly affectionate for half of the time they were together. And then the Pinky Promise payoff, if you were going to do it at all, should have been at the death scene, especially if you're going to do what you did in chapter 24 and 25. So, and honestly, you could have made that, honestly, the scene as it exists is just fine. And that's why I say it's a wasted potential issue and not necessarily a writing issue, though you could quibble about Alear being too emotional for that scene relative to how he acts at literally any other point. The closest that he gets to emotionally unstable from that point on is chapter 10 when he loses all of the emblem rings. So, on that count, if you had done something where, oh, Alir is actually going to be more stoic because he has known you for all of a day, so he will be sad that you are giving up your life in more ways than one, but seeing how much you matter to everyone else, that could motivate him to want to pick himself up, be the divine dragon that everyone expects him to be, learn more as he goes, ask people about what Lumera was like to try and get a better sense for her, and only after reaching the fourth and final nation does it really hit him just what he lost. That he had this amazing person as his mother, and all he has to remember her by is the collective memory of those around her and a gift he couldn't at the time wholly receive. And that's when the waterworks should have opened up. Not in Lethos, not in Firene, in Solm is when the waterworks should have opened up. Then there would be a hell of a lot, that I feel would have landed a hell of a lot better. What we have is fine. What we could have gotten, let me put it this way. This video I'm making for the review channel is titled, well, the working title right now is What Could Have Been a Critique of Fire Emblem Engage. So, there is a lot that could have been fixed up for this to be really good, but, well, here we are.
But I can't imagine many people were.
Definitely not for the villains, because Zephyus comes out of nowhere, Marnie's is forced, Gris you don't care about.
And then when it does tackle serious topics, like Vale's split personality, the factual horror Sombron subjected his children to, and Diamant, Alchrist, Ivy, and Hortensia all losing their fathers in pretty brutal ways, the depth feels missing. Like the game doesn't want to be a downer or something.
I mean, you look at the dev interviews, and that was exactly their intention. And I do mean exactly their intention. They were aiming to appeal to a broader audience with this. They were explicitly targeting late teens and young adults with 3 houses. And ironically, it worked out better for them because that then meant there was a consistent tone they were aiming for. They weren't afraid to shy away from the serious stuff and weren't afraid to take it super seriously. But then you go to this, and here we are.
You know how Tamara effectively lures bandits into attacking her so she can kill them in retaliation for funsies? That basically describes the tonal problem with Engage to it.
Honestly, I don't think this is the example to bring up for that, because it is jarring, but I think from a writing standpoint, it's a good kind of jarring. Because the reason I say that is when you look at how the royal family operates in general, when you look at Figado and Tamara's supports, you dig into them, and even though they are supposed to embody the freedom shtick of Solm, they are still the royal family. And so there is this undercurrent where when they need to be serious, they absolutely are. So when you get instances like Figado and, Pandreo's support, as well as Panette and, no, not Panette, Tamara, wow, how did I mix those two up? As well as Tamara's and Alir's support, it can be very serious in that instance. And to be fair, it is a very roundabout way of taking care of stuff. And you could argue that, hey, is this really the best way to go about it instead of, trying to lure people into going after you rather than actively seeking out people who are being imperiled? But at the same time, it is something that remains consistent with the Royals, where they largely keep their distance apart from acting, but do act when they need to. So I don't know if this is necessarily the point to bring up, because I don't like it, but that doesn't mean it's necessarily a problem.
This behavior could totally work in a cartoon-esque environment, where death and defeating bandits isn't treated like it's super serious, even if it is in the real world. But here, whether death matters and war is bad depends entirely on the chapter and the character and the moment.
Yeah, and that is something that annoys me, because with what they do in chapters 21 and 22, they made the decision to say that death, something that was a grave consequence, literally, for people like Lumera, for Morian, for Hyacinth, and for others, is now a minor inconvenience when it affects the protagonist. That is absolutely something worth calling out.
The consistency is all over the place, and that makes Engage a game that is difficult to take super serious.
But again, it doesn't need to be wholly consistent on the tone throughout, and there are points where I feel it does match it. Well, that having that differing tone actually helps it. And an example I will give it is Chapter 11. Well, following Chapter 11, you have this very serious instance where you are running away. They take it very seriously, and you buy it in the moment because they are taking it very seriously, and everyone has a reasonable perspective on that. I don't like the setup for it, as mentioned earlier, but following this, you have Fogado introducing himself, and it is very carefree, at least on the surface. But then you dig a little deeper once you reach Chapter 14, and you realize, no, this was deadly serious for them, but from a player standpoint, seeing it for the first time, it's actually not the worst idea, because from a gameplay standpoint, you just lost 6 emblem rings and got 2 different ones in exchange. So you need to get used to only having those 2 emblem rings, so a lower stakes fight is actually exactly what you need from a design standpoint. So there are instances where they can make it work, but the problem is that, well, a lot of the issues with the tone aren't necessarily execution-based issues, but rather aren't necessarily writing-based issues, but more subjective concerns.
Which is definitely an outlying factor when viewed against the rest of the series. However, this is far from the first Fire Emblem game with an inconsistent tone. Fates is notorious for this, arguably even more so than Engage.
Actually, that's the funny thing, because I haven't played Fates, I only know of its reputation, especially given all the brouhaha around localization regarding it, but either way, all that to say, I know of its reputation, but what was funny is that people were saying, well, compared to Fates, Engage looks, compared to Engage, Fates somehow looks better. That's what I've heard, though bear in mind, this is secondhand information, I cannot speak with authority on Fates.
But plenty of older titles have these moments too, like Awakening, Sacred Stones and Shadows of Valentia / Gaiden. Definitely not saying this trio has more inconsistency than Engage, absolutely not, but what is a factor that definitely plays a role is that unlike all other Fire Emblem games, I don't think Engage's goal is to be 100% serious.
Well, I mean, it definitely wasn't. You're showing an example of it. This is a major example I bring up as far as character writing, because the issue that a lot of people had is that there are moments where they absolutely want to take you seriously, but the first thing that you often see for pretty much every character is them being silly. You have Vander flustered over Clan and Fran being silly and going overboard, which, to be fair, they're kids. They would react that, well, kids more so anyway. They're supposedly 16 if you look at the game files, but I don't believe that. I would sooner guess 14. But they are more childlike, and so they would absolutely be that excited. But then there are instances like this where, what the hell? There's over-apologetic, and there's whatever the hell this is. Oh, hang on. I hit spacebar, and it added a spacebar to my script. Okay, click off of that.
There are moments that try to be and fail, but I don't believe for 1 second this game ever tried to be the serious, deep and mature war tale that Save Free Houses aims to be.
Well, again, they are aiming for very different things on that count.
The Sunday cartoon comparison has been brought up a lot in the
and I don't buy it because I don't know if Japan has the same culture as America did when it comes to their Saturday morning cartoons, but that's beside the point.
2 years the game has been out, and I think that's a pretty astute comparison, to be honest.
Honestly, I don't buy it, because, let me put it this way, it feels like a cope. Because when you look at how idiotic Zephyr is, just blabbing about the split personality to Vale and to Alir, when there is no tactical advantage in doing so, it feels like an instance where saying, oh, Saturday morning cartoon is just a cope to justify saying, oh, but we were okay with it in our Saturday morning cartoons when the villains would go on evil monologues and say exactly their plan, and somehow be both monumentally powerful and monumentally brain dead. No. It's bad then, it's bad now.
To be honest. Now, whether that is a tone a Fire Emblem game should be going for is debatable, of course, and most of all, I think the timing of Engage coming right after arguably the most well-written or at least lore-heavy Fire Emblem game was unfortunate.
Uh-huh. It's funny because according to, well, I don't know if it was part of the rumor that called this game Aang's existence or if it was on a dev interview. My understanding is that Engage and Three Houses were developed at or around the same time as each other. They've both been in the works for a while.
Had it come before Three Houses, after Fates basically, I think
I'd be very curious to see how the fanbase would respond. I'd be very curious indeed. Holy crap, that would be fascinating. I think that might have killed a lot of people's interest in it entirely.
this tone would have been received way better. Because really, compared to say Fates, which is I would say even more inconsistent, while also taking itself way more seriously, and I would prefer what Engage tries to do personally. Not for
Well, I can't comment on that because I haven't played Fates, so I'll let that go.
every entry, but for the celebration title that Engage was meant to be, I can work with it. But I do admit the tone IS went for here, it's not one that resonates with a ton of fans. That much was obvious from the moment the game leaked and Alear was dubbed Colgate due to her
Well, Toothpaste Chan was the one I heard. Colgate-kun was another.
out there design. Well, you could say that Engage wearing its tone on its sleeve should have caused players to change their expectations accordingly. I don't think that is fair to ask when the series has never been as cartoony or unserious as Engage is. So I guess that, in a way, so far you could say I agree with the popular opinion to a decent extent. However, now is the time where we deviate. The plot.
Oh, you better not try and defend this plot. Oh, you better not. No, you better be very careful when defending this plot. Because yes, structurally speaking, there is something workable underneath, but there are multiple points where cause and effect just shatter. You are not winning an argument on plot.
Factual story of the game. I don't think it is as bad as people say it is.
Yes, it is. Okay, well, okay. I'd be curious to know what you think people say. I'd say that there was a lot of potential that was squandered, and that there are multiple points where the plot just flat out breaks. Let's see what you think people say.
It's simple, that's for sure. It is
Yes, that is true, and simple does not necessarily mean worse, I will grant you that.
not intricate or mind-blowing or whatever.
Yeah,
It's a story like we've seen many times before, with evil dragon dudes, magical MacGuffins we need to collect, a few traders here and there, you know the drill.
and that is not necessarily an issue, and I'm not going to be the one to say it's an issue. Just because it's been done before doesn't mean it can't still be done well.
It touches upon a lot of Fire Emblem tropes, which on one hand makes sense, since this is a celebration title, but it also makes it predictable. Morion had his death written all over him, the same thing with Lumira, Mauvier switching sides was obvious as well, just like Vale's eventual turnaround. Lumira especially felt wasted to me. Had
Okay, good, we're on the same page for that.
she been around for a couple more chapters to lure us into a false sense of security and
Honestly, no, don't keep her around because you don't want Alear learning anything about his past before you want the big reveal. Because what you want is to have Lumira's shadow existing over everything that Alear is doing, to where he feels this either pressure or responsibility to press ahead and be the divine dragon that everybody says he is. I feel that would have worked better, having that as an undercurrent. In fact, it may have helped to ground the plot more so as well.
get us more familiar with her. Her death and later dramatic return could have worked.
Honestly, if you kill her early, just remove the first time you see the Pinky Promise scene as well. So that it can, well, I think I already said that, but remove the first Pinky Promise bit so that it has more weight.
But right now, it just doesn't. But I do think Engage's plot has its highlights as well. I really like how drastically different the regions in Elyos are, for example. It
Okay, so that's fair.
gives each its own identity in a way we haven't seen much. In the way
I do wonder about that. Because visual variety doesn't necessarily mean identity. I will grant you that because of how, well, the problem is a lot of the characters appear as caricatures at first glance, so there is certainly visual and and character writing variety between the four nations. Even after everything changed as when Elusia attacks. Yes, I had to make that joke. I do not apologize. But, I'll be curious to see where you go with this.
way they're governed, how they treat their citizens, and why they joined the fight against Sombron.
Well, I feel like they could have gone into more depth in this, because if Three Houses had begun by saying, hey, Fargus Kingdom of Chivalry, I would have had similar criticisms for it as I do for Engage, where what we're told at first glance about the nations doesn't really tell us all that much, to where we have the visual components. So what does it mean for Firene to be a kingdom of abundance? That, to some extent, it can work, but I don't like it as a description because it's coming from Lumera's lips. Because she would have a unique perspective on each of the four nations, especially given Illusia and their propensity to worship the Fell Dragon. So the fact that we don't really get much of Lumera's perspective on the four nations, but instead get their moniker, or at least something that is attributed to the nations, I don't like this. Even here, again, wasted potential.
I like how the emblems are weaved into the story without becoming overbearing, although...
They shouldn't have taken over the Paralogs. The characters should have been more involved with the Paralogs. No. Give me a scene of Ivy and Alchrist having to work together while out in Sohm. I don't care if you have to bundle an emblem in and let that be the lesson. No. Give me that scene, damn it.
I do think this would have been even stronger if Fire Emblem Lords in the past would have had more different personalities.
That's not the issue. You could have them given an opportunity to stand out if you had them playing off the characters and not just in the Bond conversations where they get all of a sentence.
I like how you're truly knocked down a peg after Sombron's revival. After
locking you into a place that you could have easily busted out, given that you have to bust through the very door they locked behind you from a gameplay standpoint. No!
Rarely has such a mid-story moment ever felt like you have really already lost.
And that shouldn't have allowed you to leave. You are surrounded on all sides. Veildragon and Veil on one side, Boarhounds on another, past your main exit, unless you're breaking a window. Even then, Veil has the Draconic Time Crystal and all 6 of your emblem rings. You should not have been able to escape that. And yet you just skip to outside as if it just doesn't... Oh. I hate this game.
While the ending with Lear becoming an emblem and summoning the help of all other lords definitely has a cheesy tone.
Yes.
I can't...
That's not the issue I have with this scene, but that's beside the point.
...help but watch with a smile when I see decades of history lined up like that.
It means nothing to me. It's hollow.
But most of all...
The whole Fire Emblem bit was hollow. That's gonna be the ending of part 2, where I just say once again, what a fucking waste.
While again, Engage's story is no masterpiece, I also don't think it is significantly worse than a lot of other Fire Emblem stories we've had in the past.
No, it's worse. It is worse. The GBA games were not this bad. I can't speak to all of them. I mean, to be fair, the original games would have been very simple, which also isn't a problem, as I've said. I can't speak to the DS era or the 3DS era, naturally, but Three Houses was not this bad. The GBA games were not this bad. Warriors was not this bad. Warriors 3 Hopes was not this bad. And it punted the ending into ambiguity.
The stories of Shadow Dragon, all GBA games, Mystery of the Emblem, Awakening, and Fates are more or less the same quality or worse, I would argue.
No. No. Go to your room.
Yet they don't even get remotely the same amount of flack as Engage does.
Because they aren't as bad. Okay, let me make sure I have listened to exactly what you say without me interrupting and being a curmudgeon. Let's see exactly what you say, just to make sure I'm not taking you out of context or anything.
Definitely has a cheesy tone. I can't help but watch with a smile when I see decades of history lined up like that. But most of all, while again, Engage's story is no masterpiece, I also don't think it is significantly worse than a lot of other Fire Emblem stories we've had in the past. The stories of Shadow Dragon, all GBA games, Mystery of the Emblem, Awakening, and Fates are more or less the same quality or worse, I would argue.
Bullshit. You take a look at the Sacred Stones and you tell me that that's a worse story. I freaking dare you. Substantiate your point.
Yet they don't even get remotely the same amount of flack as Engage does.
You don't have much time to explain this point. Explain thyself.
Part of that is nostalgia, I'm sure.
No. I played this one for the first time when I reviewed it about a year or two before the Three Houses came out. This one is not nostalgia.
Part of that is what we've already discussed, tone. Games like Blazing Blade and Awakening also definitely have their poorly written moments, but their tone is much more serious.
To be fair, I wasn't as focused on the writing quality back then, so that could be correct, but I'd very much like to see you look at the Sacred Stones in that regard. I think that one, from a writing standpoint, holds up fairly well. That is based on primarily memory, but I at least played through the point... Well, I remember at one point I played a little bit of it when it got put onto NSO, even though I have the original cartridge sitting on my shelf, because I was thinking, oh, this might be fun to do a retrospective on. And just before you even hit the splits, I feel it's very well written. I don't see an issue with it. So what exactly makes Engage different?
And what definitely plays a role as well is my biggest problem with Engage's writing. Presentation.
Really? Okay, go on.
I genuinely believe that a big...
You're not going to substantiate the criticisms, are you? You're just going to focus on Blazing Blade and Awakening. You're not even going to talk about Sacred Stones, are you? At least you didn't bring Three Houses into the mix, so I'll grant you that.
Part of the criticism of Engage's writing is actually the result of a dislike for the way the game is presented rather than how it's actually written.
Writing does factor into presentation. The descriptions of a character and how they present themselves can be bundled into writing. Because you could quibble about the definition of writing specifically, but presentation is an important component, I will grant you, but I would consider that to fall under writing as well. The fact that there was an explicit choice to choose a particular color scheme, I feel absolutely does come down to a writing decision to try and convey a certain point. Now, you could argue that it doesn't fall into writing, and it's not something that I am completely married to. I'd be curious to hear how you distinguish it from writing, but if this were something like a novel, it would absolutely be considered part of the writing. And I might be biased on it because of that perspective, where I'm thinking, oh, here's a fantasy novel where we've got a giant feast where every single character's outfit has to be explained in excruciating detail so you know exactly how these characters present themselves and all that fun stuff. So, because of that, I'm more willing to lean into presentation being a writing concern rather than a different kind of concern. But given that this is a visual medium, I could see why someone would make the argument that it's not under writing.
Like, truly. Keep the story of Engage intact, but pour it into the mold of a GBA Fire Emblem game, and people wouldn't knock on the writing nearly as much.
I wonder about that. If you had dialed down on the ridiculous-looking outfits, I think it might have helped. Well, it would have helped a little bit, but then you get into character dialogue, and I think that still would have been... Well, I think that still would have caused significant flack, because... It's actually kind of funny because as part of the review I'm doing on Engage, I looked over all of the supports for the Sacred Stones for reasons that'll be clear 3 to 5 years from now. And it certainly had some that were more silly and less serious, but given that all of them, most if not all of them, are taking place on a battlefield, there is still very much a seriousness to all of them. The tone is still far more consistent on that count, with everyone taking the current situation very seriously, to where characters like La Rochelle are the exception rather than the norm. In fact, that might actually be the trick there, is that and it may end up getting brought up when we get to character writing, that perhaps what the focus should have been on was fixing up the character writing, or at least modifying it to where it was a bit more grounded, because characters like Diamant are the norm in the GBA games. Characters like La Rochelle are the norm in Engage. I think that's probably the best way to put it. That is where I think the major disconnect came from, not even necessarily the presentation.
There is a huge difference between seeing a sprite-based Eliwood mourn his father, who you never even really met, and reading how he felt, allowing your brain to fill in the gaps, versus seeing a high-quality cutscene of a Lear with his clown hair doing a pinky swear with his mother while she's dying. The camera
Well, the problem with that is that they did the pinky promise too soon and had a Lear do an emotional outburst that didn't make sense necessarily for the moment and wasted potential story points that they could have tapped into throughout.
are really trying not to focus on her cleavage or the
Of course you bring that up.
completely empty room you're standing in, and their voice actor is doing everything they can to sound serious.
And to be fair, that is another issue at hand where you've got, well, very little time spent in Lethos to where the only people we meet in Lethos are Lumera and the stewards. So we have no connection to the place, which means we have no reason to care when we see it trashed once we get back there in Chapter 21.
Oh, and then your switch starts to dim from the
Yep, that happened to me once or twice.
lack of activity just as she's about to die.
And that's the other problem. They drag it out. And that's another reason why it should have been more subdued from Alir's perspective, to where they wouldn't necessarily have him do the emotional outbursts, because then they could simplify it to say, alright, I will do my best. I don't know what awaits, but I'll do my best. You could keep it simpler in the moment, and then have all sorts of fun later, but, yeah, well. I'm starting to repeat myself. I should call it out. Well, man, we've been here on this video for 40 minutes. Can you tell what I really care about?
Millionth time, I'm not saying that this scene is wonderfully written or anything. What I'm saying is that it's a 6 out of 10 written scene, brought down to a 2 out of 10 because of the presentation.
The presentation wasn't the issue for me, but I could see why that would be a distraction for some.
Hell,
The issue for me was the wasted potential, because otherwise it is just a 6 out of 10.
you could even argue factual writing, also part of the presentation in a way,
I mean, the words chosen to convey what's happening? Okay, well, let me just hear that again without the text distracting me.
is that it's a 6 out of 10 written scene, brought down to a 2 out of 10 because of the presentation. Hell, you could even argue factual writing, also part of the presentation in a way, brings down the effect of the plot beat that is Lumera dying. This can be seen even better in the scene where Lumera finds evil Alir, which, as a story beat, I find pretty interesting and unique. But it's also the scene with the infamous "I wanna be a good dragon" line, which, yeah,
That was silly.
not a good look. I like the idea of Zephyia realizing in her final moments that the family she wanted so desperately she already had with the Four Hounds. I think that's a nicely drafted moment and realization for her, and
But it drags on for way too damn long, and did not have nearly enough build-up, and she spends the entire game acting like a mustache-twirling villain until just at the last minute to where you don't give a shit.
bittersweet that it comes in her last moments alive.
All that I've said are writing issues, not presentation issues.
But the scene itself is presented with such over-the-top emotion, and that ridiculous shot of them all standing on a white background, that it loses the punch that I do believe it intrinsically had.
Okay, you know what? That actually is a fair concern, because yeah, it is grossly overblown for how much of a mustache-twirling villain she was otherwise.
In moments like this, it's as if the game is so scared you might not pick up on what it means, that it overloads you with hints about what you're supposed to think and feel.
Yeah, and that's something that is worth mentioning, because, as said before, they did target this for all ages, but children are smarter and picking stuff up like this than you thought. I mean, it's something you hear when discussing Pokemon all the time. You hear, oh, just look at the Pokemon games. Yeah, they're so easy. Yeah, they're designed for kids. Bitch, Pokemon Yellow was designed for kids. I got stuck there a couple points because I wasn't sure how to get past the old man who needed a soda pop. There is stuff like that where, yeah, the games weren't always clear on what you needed to do, and sometimes that's not necessarily an issue, but come on, there is a line between... If we could figure it out back then, you can figure it out now. Stop coddling them.
To the point it begins to near on parody. And while I do like some of the ideas Engage put forward, they're not remotely complicated or subtle enough to need this level of help, or any level of help really.
Or this amount of time.
And so, I wouldn't describe the writing of Engage's main story as bad, terrible, garbage, you name it.
I would, because there are significant issues with the plot that break it. Key points. Like Chapter 11, like Chapter 17. Do I need to bust out the moment where Fire Emblem Engage lost me again? I did that on one session where, oh, hey Vale, you just found out that you've been puppeteered into doing things against your will. You stay with these guys, you're probably going to be made to do it again. What are you going to do? toss a ring back to Valir and then do freaking nothing? You had everything at your disposal that you could have used to get the hell out of that situation, and you did nothing. You are a moron. Literally, the whole entire plot happens because you and Zephyr are morons.
I think it's a fine, decent, acceptable cake.
Nope.
Covered in spoiled cherries and delivered to your doorstep at a time where you're expecting a 4-course meal.
I mean, that last part is correct. I agree with the analogy. But I would also say that the cake itself is burnt.
Disappointment, even frustration at the writing of the game is understandable under those circumstances. But throwing everything under the bus when not everything is equally contributing to the problem is not something I'm a fan of.
Well, we disagree on what the main problems are, but still.
And don't forget, there is a final fourth category to the writing, one where I honestly disagree with what seems to be the common opinion even more than I do in regards to the main story.
Funnily enough, I think we might actually be inadvertently agreeing on presentation now that I think of it, because the biggest issue I have with the character writing is that there actually is some depth when you dig into them, but the problem is that it takes so long to reach that depth. Because, to put it into perspective, I spent something like 80 hours after the main story was over unlocking support conversations. And the reason I did that is because I wanted to emphasize in my mind, okay, forget looking them up online, this is how people who were seriously invested in the story would unlock them. And it takes for freaking ever. And because of that, and because a lot of the C supports are pure fluff, there's very little reason to dig further in, and only after going through them, as I'm looking over another aspect, am I thinking, okay, so I see where they're going from C to B to A, but the problem is it takes so long that you end up forgetting moments like that, and then it just leads you to a much worse impression until you do go back through and look at them in chronological, well, back to back to back, but are you going to want to do that after having such a negative first impression? So, yeah. Unironically, the presentation, or rather how long it takes to retrieve them, is actually probably the biggest issue with the character writing, not necessarily the character writing itself, though I do have some issues there as well.
The character writing. It sometimes feels to me like Engage's biggest crime in regards to characters is that it isn't Free Houses.
I mean, that's not entirely incorrect. I will grant you that. I will grant you that that's not entirely incorrect, because that's something that I'm going to be mentioning early on in my video, where, like it or not, Three Houses is the most recent mainline entry before Engage, and so there are going to be comparisons. Because and I think that probably is the best point to make the support comparison, because even with the initial conversations, you get such a very different tone. Just between two C supports, Dimitri and Felix versus Dimitri and Ash. In fact, I watched those two back to back in that order, where you have Felix ripping into Dimitri for things that we haven't been told about and which Dimitri doesn't deny, which creates some intrigue. And then we go to Dimitri trying to help Ash fix up some tents, and then having to be a bit tricky in order to, quote unquote, reward him for his hard work. And then Ash gets all flustered because why is my crown prince going and fetching me sugar candies? So there is a wide range of tone even there, but because it is more evenly mixed up to where you have the stuff that's a lighter tone mixed in alongside the super serious stuff, it makes it much easier to swallow in that case. To where, okay, we are taking this seriously, but these characters aren't just all doom and gloom all the time. There are moments of levity, so there is still humanity in here and not just doom. So that, I feel, the supports, I think, utterly ruined the characterization for a lot of people. That would be my guess anyway. And it certainly didn't help me appreciate them.
Because, yeah, I fully agree. The character writing in Free Houses is way better than in Engage.
Okay, at least we agree on that. Thank you.
Like, it's not even close.
Uh-huh.
But, I'm also of the opinion that the character writing in Free Houses is among the best I've ever seen in a game in general.
That is fair.
Like, the fact that Edelgard Discourse still exists today is proof of how well written a character she is.
Oh yeah, absolutely, because I've even made a joke about it in that first response video I ever made. The fact that there are people who will still argue about that, because honestly, I think Edelgard was in the wrong. I am that guy, but at the same time, I played Blue Lines first, and localization didn't help that because of something that Edelgard says in that route. But either way, putting that aside, it makes complete sense why Edelgard performs the actions she does, but I, with full knowledge of the situation, would condemn her for doing so. So that makes an excellent character.
And the other house leaders aren't exactly far beneath her.
Oh, not at all. Dimitri is my favorite by a country mile, and it ain't even close. Second, well, who would I consider the best? I think I would, at one point I'd say Dimitri, Seteth, and Ashe in that order. Felix got bumped up pretty hard because of Warriors 3 Hopes. I'm not sure who I'd consider third. I think the only character that's weak, quote-unquote, is Byleth and maybe Raphael, given how simple he is. But then again, Raphael is the one simple-minded character, and so that's not necessarily an issue. You kind of need that kind of person around every once in a while just to offer a contrast.
Three Houses, to me, is genuinely elite in this department. Among the best I've ever seen in gaming. Engage not being able to match that quality says nothing about how good it actually is.
Yep, that is fair. That's absolutely fair. It is H-Bomb versus Coughing Baby. That is fair.
Once again, the tone of the characters is certainly lighter than the majority of Fire Emblem games, and they are way more out there than what we've seen before.
That is a fair concern, although that falls more into presentation than character writing, but I guess it's sort of both.
But I don't find them unenjoyable in the slightest. Yanaka is a definite highlight for me. I like the way Diamant and Alchrist contrast.
Oh yeah, honestly, Diamant's my favorite character by a landslide, but that's more just because he's the one normal guy and all that. Alchrist, well, I'm really torn about Alchrist, honestly, because I feel that they go completely overboard on the self-loathing. But at the same time, there is genuine heart to be found in those supports once you dig further down. His supports with Saline especially were probably my favorite in the game because, oh, here's the rare C support where we're taking things seriously. Thank you!
Like Ivy and the uncharacteristic relationship she has with her retainers, who are also great individually, by the way.
Oh yeah, Ivy and Zelkov were good. Kagetsu, I found him more cringe than Zelkov, despite the strange manner of speaking from Zelkov, but Zelkov, because it's more subdued, ends up standing out decently well on that count, and to be fair, he does have moments where he takes things very serious, like in his final conversation with Jean.
And while there are certainly characters like Chloe, Lapis, Amber, Louis, Marin, and Pandreo, who are hard carried by a few of their interests or personality traits, I do find those combinations interesting and intriguing enough to be fun.
They can be. The problem is that there's an overdose of it right from the start, which means people are less inclined to go digging further.
Don't get me wrong, they don't feel like real people.
Yep, they feel more like caricatures, so at least we agree on that.
I think they're fun and engaging cartoon characters.
Okay, engaging. You know what? I use that word too. I can't say anything, but I see what you did there anyway. Alright, what were you saying?
Don't get me wrong, they don't feel like real people. But I think they're fun and engaging cartoon characters, to bring that comparison back.
I feel like even cartoon characters have more depth than that, but never mind me.
And I don't know about you, but I prefer that over Brooding Swordsman number 5, and I consider myself the...
Well, who would we consider Brooding Swordsman number 5? I would very much like to know who's considered Brooding Swordsman number 5, but we're near the end of this video. I don't think I'm going to get my answer.
The Strongest Warrior number 7, as we've seen in the series more often. And I once again consider it an upgrade compared to Fates, where the characters are also one-dimensional, but that one dimension isn't all that interesting to begin with.
I'll take your word for it.
And that's not to say everyone in Engage is a slam dunk.
Oh, definitely not.
I'm not a fan of Alfred's training-obsessed retainers, and Bunei is a little too weird, for example, but I do...
Actually, who is my least favorite character? Bunei's definitely up there. Who would I... Oh, wait, no. Yeah, Bunei's up... Well, Bunei is the most cringe. Goldmary, I despise. I hate her. In a way that I've never hated a character before. I've got to be honest. She's a prideful asshole, and I don't care what anybody says. Screw you. She's a terrible character. I hate her.
I do think people are too harsh on Engage's character writing for what is more a case of them not vibing with a less serious tone regarding characters, or perhaps overrating how deep older Fire Emblem characters actually are.
I'm not going to claim that older Fire Emblem characters are incredibly deep, but because they are trying to do less, it's less of a problem, let's put it that way.
But I think that really sums up how I look at the discourse around Engage's writing. It appears like a very decent chunk of the complaints are not actually about Engage. They're about it being Free Houses' follow-up and how different the games are.
Well, hopefully I gave a few examples of that not necessarily being the case, and to be fair, I put the same screws on Three Houses, and you can absolutely call out points like the turning point in the Blue Lions route where, oh, we have this character who's trying to stab Dimitri, and then someone throws himself in the way and takes the hit when he knows magic, and Byleth is also there with the Sword of the Creator and the ability to turn back the hands of time. This should not have played out as we see it. There needs to be another way to deliver this if you really want the sacrifice play to get Dimitri out of the funk he's in. Despite the fact that the conversations that follow that are my favorite in the entire game, that scene, you can put the screws to it just as much, but that is the one point in the Blue Lions route that I can call out for being an issue. There are 3 major issues that I can point to where the plot has serious issues or wasted potential that just brings down the entire thing. Because Chapter 11 for letting you walk away unscathed, Chapter 17 for Zephyr and Vale being complete dunces, and then Chapters 21 and 22, well, I believe it's those two, in general.
And again, just so you know, if you ask me whether I want Free Houses writing or Engage's next time, I'm fully in camp Free Houses. But for a change of pace, an anniversary title, a game clearly not designed to be Free Houses, I think Engage does a decent job.
From a gameplay standpoint, I don't mind it. From a story standpoint, they really need to fix things up. And I do wonder at their ability to tell a compelling story if this is the caliber that they're bringing for the main from the main studio.
Not amazing, the writing won't blow you away and the characters won't either, but people are being too harsh on it or too easy on the other games when they say Engage is the Fire Emblem with the definitive worst writing.
I do wonder about that, but I suspected, well, it's hard to argue further than we have already because you haven't offered that many substantive criticisms of the older games, and that is the difficulty when you make that argument, is that you need to be, well, if you're having to try and put down the other games, the other games in the series to try and lift up your particular game, that in itself is a problem. At which point, okay, are you really actually invested in this? Is this really the argument you want to make? Because you're talking to people who really like this, and you're saying that it's all bad, that's not a winning strategy. Oh, but one time a stormtrooper bonked his head on the Death Star. No, I don't care. That doesn't justify The Last Jedi. Stop it.
But hey, that's just my take. How do you feel about the writing in Engage? Especially...
Well, I feel like I've very well explained my feeling on the writing of Engaged. Hopefully it was coherent, but still.
When you fracture it up in those 4 categories like I've done. Share it in the comments below. If you enjoyed this video, please consider giving it a like and subscribe to the channel to stay updated on all my future Fire Emblem content coming up.
So, I guess, to give an overall critique of the video, I appreciate you wanting to go beyond the box and, well, go outside the norm and tackle a topic like this, because the reasons why people are going to dislike a game are going to vary wildly. The fact that you had a big issue with the tone being inconsistent, well, I didn't think that was as big a deal compared to what I see as writing concerns. With my big issue with the writing, with the character writing being how they presented, whereas your presentation concerns were more focused on main story points. There are absolutely different points where we can agree or disagree on what is the most important, and I do appreciate this video on that count. Thank you for making it. But I do wonder at how strong the point is, because I feel that there are significant issues with with what you can definitively call the writing, and not just brush away as, oh, that's presentation, or oh, that's just how it looks right now, oh, that's just where the camera is. When there are substantive issues that you can dig into, such as the fact that Marnie's trauma dump comes out of nowhere the same chapter that she dies. In a way that is supposed to be tragic. So, I think the writing, the hate that Engage gets for its writing, I think, is justified. I'd be curious to see what kind of arguments you were seeing regarding Engage's writing that would have compelled you to make this. And I think that's might be an issue on my side, is I haven't paid attention to the Fire Emblem fan base for a while, so I can't necessarily speak with full authority on what all has been said, but still. I guess to end as you, who did? That's my take. So hopefully this ended up being an interesting little back and forth. So, that in mind, let's see. Holy crap, I spent over an hour just dissecting this. Ugh. What is this now? EFAP? Ugh. Ah. Still, topic I'm very passionate about. Maybe I should have made a response video to this, though to be fair, I will be making a proper video on Engage at some point when I stop getting distracted by smaller games like Silksong. But to be fair, actually, how much audio? Well, how far along in audio editing am I for? Oh, God, barely any. Oh, I've got 10 hours, almost 10 hours, actually closer to 9 hours of audio that I still need to edit. That's going to end up, and that's just for part one. This is nearly a 90,000 word script. Oh, God, and it's not even done because I need to add substantial details to the final few chapters. What am I doing with my life? Either way, that's enough Fire Emblem. I have had my fill. I am satisfied now. Thank you for the video. That was that was a nice discussion. Well, that was a nice time for me. I don't know about the rest of you. So, now to something that I've been pestered about for a while now. So, this video was recommended to me a very long time ago, around the same time that, for context, I was getting a bit of negative feedback on my line delivery over on the review channel. Short version there is I had let my vocal cadence become too repetitive, to where it ended up feeling jarring for a lot of people, and it wasn't until I got a comment on a Tears of the Kingdom review that it all clicked. So took a few attempts for it to sink in, and this channel was lifted up as someone that I could look at to say, hey, you're trying to do something more straight-laced. Here's someone who also is more straight-laced. Check it out. And also, I want you to know about this particular game. So, here we are. Okay, now that I'm not talking a mile a minute, I can actually go for water. So, I do not expect that we will watch the entirety of this because, look at this, 48 minutes. We're not likely to see to the totality of it. But, either way, I know basically nothing about this game. I know very little about Donkey Kong, apart from reputation. And honestly, I don't keep track of Mario in general, let alone Donkey Kong all that much, because I'm someone who grew up a PC gamer, so the main games that I think about when I think back to my childhood are flight sims and Star Wars games. So, for the most part, Nintendo is a relatively recent addition relative to when I was growing up. And the only real exposure I had for a long time was just a few random games on the Game Boy Advance, because my parents were fairly frugal. They had I do not remember a time before computers, though I do remember a time before the internet. And because they already had the computers back when Windows 95 was the new hotness, there wasn't necessarily a need to get a game console because they knew, oh, there are PC games, we can just go for that. It'll be fine. So, the first few games that my family owned were stuff like Myst, Diablo, Terminal Velocity, for the 5 of you who know what that is. So the only reason that we would ever get a console or something different is if it was offering something that we simply could not get on a PC. Because there were platformers back then too, and I think we owned one of the Gex games at some point, or at least a demo for it. So, because of that, the Game Boy Advance was back when laptops were still in their infancy, and the Wii had motion controls. So those were the first proper consoles that we had, in part because of the novelty therein. And so when I think Nintendo first, it's stuff like Fire Emblem, it's stuff like Advance Wars, it's stuff like Pokemon. So that's what I think when I think Pokemon back in my childhood. So because of that, I have very little nostalgia or interest in Mario, especially since I just didn't spend a whole lot of time with platformers. The closest that I get to Twitch skills / precision are shooters. So I'd be curious to know why this has been lifted up as something that I should check out, and I don't expect that we'll get through the totality of it, especially given that my voice is starting to give way because I've been here a while, but still, we'll see how far we get.
Thanks to HelloFresh for sponsoring this video.
I hate it already. Okay. Short version, we're going to skip the HelloFresh sponsor segment because they got accused of labor issues. Well, issues regarding labor where they were not treating their employees very well. And we're also accused of breaking child labor laws, or at least the people they were using as to hire and handle that sort of thing were accused of such. I don't have the full details to hand. I looked them up briefly before starting this when I saw that, but just fair warning, we're just going to skip the sponsor segment this time.
God, is it close to the holidays already?
When did this video come out? November. Okay, 2022. And also bear in mind, I don't blame Some Call Me Johnny here for anything related to the sponsor segment. A lot of the accusations came 2024, so not an issue for him.
That's when YouTube videos actually matter. I better get to work. Which means no time for grocery shopping or fancy restaurants.
Oh, we're already doing the... You know what? Just getting the ad out at the start. Fair enough.
Always there's something. Shall we continue on with the show?
Yes, please. Alright, let's take a look. Alright, so doing the usual YouTuber thing. It's been a long time since I've seen one of these, actually. Huh. I wonder how different they are for a particular video, depending on the topic. I don't know this channel all that well. I just occasionally see them in the recommended, but it's usually not games I'm super concerned about.
You know, I can't believe it's taken me this long to play my first 3D platformer from Rare. I got Donkey Kong Country under my belt, yeah, as I'm sure was the case for a lot of folks, but you ask someone today what they know Rare from, their endeavors on the Nintendo 64 is what they'll likely bring up. They had GoldenEye, Banjo-Kazooie, and Tooie, Conker's Bad Fur Day.
Wait, they did Conker's Bad Fur Day as well? Shows you what I know.
Maybe you'll get that odd one that'll mention Star Fox Adventures on the GameCube, but that person doesn't count.
Why don't they count? Yeah, well, whatever.
As I didn't grow up with the Nintendo 64 again. I was on Team PlayStation. All these acclaimed titles went right over my head. And all I could gather from friends that did play them was that they were beloved classics. But even years later, when I had easier access to a Nintendo 64 and its library, I still wouldn't consider giving these the time of the day. Outside of Mario 64, both Zelda games, Pokemon Stadium, and Smash Brothers.
So, effectively, the normie-friendly ones that most people would think of when they think back to that era. That's fair.
These games just didn't pique my curiosity, despite enjoying previous outings. And honestly, I couldn't give you a precise reason. It's true I did sort of wane from platformers starting in the early 2000s, but it's not like I stopped playing them completely.
Well, our interests do change over time. That's entirely fair. The games I'm playing right now are very different from the games I was playing back then. And you'll see it on the video I'll be posting to the review channel within the next month or two. The fact that you've never heard me talk about Total War games, for instance, and yet that was a major part of my time as a teenager. I spent a lot of time on everything from Shogun 2 all the way down to Rome 1. And enjoyed a lot of them, to be fair. I've got 100 hours on each of them at this point. And they are coming up in going to be mentioned in passing on a video I'll be putting out on the review channel soon. But, well, soon is relatively speaking anyway, but your interests do change. It's just a matter of what you are in the mood for at the time, what your interests are, all that fun stuff. So that's fair.
I was still playing Sonic games after all, and I suffered through Super Mario Sunshine. No, I just wasn't interested in them, and it's only now, years later, where I'm finally starting to change that. And Donkey Kong, did he get a debut in 3D? So the year is 1999. The Nintendo 64 was about 3 years into its lifespan, captivating Nintendo fans with juggernauts from Mario and Zelda, while Rare was already striking gold with 1997 GoldenEye, considered to be the pioneer in first-person shooters for consoles, and Banjo-Kazooie, released in 1998, that even today is considered one of Rare's best 3D platformers. However, Donkey Kong was still on their minds, and after giving the Super Nintendo and Game Boy their take on one of Nintendo's oldest IPs, they wanted to bring Donkey Kong to the N64 proper with a 3D game so large it would make all other 3D platformers look like ants by comparison.
And how well did it succeed on that? Though I guess we'll find out on that count. I'm kind of surprised they were allowed to do that, although this would have been 3 years in. I'm assuming Super Mario 64 was the launch title, so yeah, that's probably enough distance.
A game so large that it was one of the few that required the Nintendo 64 expansion pack, which doubled the console's RAM, allowing
Oh, so that's why most people wouldn't have necessarily heard about it or worried about it, huh? Fair enough.
better graphics, better resolution, and better draw distance. In fact, Donkey Kong 64 was bundled with the expansion pack when it first released,
Well, it would need to be, it's given now that I didn't even know that existed.
so that consumers could, actually play the game, lest they get a bunch of angry parents after the holidays. Afterwards, the expansion pack was only needed for like 2 other games, I think: Zelda Majora's Mask and Perfect Dark, and that was another game developed by Rare.
Interesting.
And I like to think this is because like of a secret mandate from Nintendo. Like, look, don't make the game too large to keep needing the expansion pack, because if we gotta keep producing these things, those manufacturing costs are coming out of your fucking paycheck.
To be fair, that might have actually been the case.
But building on top of the engine they used for Banjo-Kazooie, Rare managed to successfully transition Donkey Kong from pre-rendered 2D sprites to full 3D models that could move and express themselves in ways that wasn't feasible beforehand. In holiday 1999, Donkey Kong 64 would take consumers by storm with a marketing campaign that was about double of what other games had at the time. It was around $22 million, dedicated to commercials,
Wow, and back then, that would have been a lot of money too, huh?
radio spots, billboards, and a Dr. Pepper promotion. That seems
I mean, I've seen weirder.
random. To
I've seen weirder.
win the game, drink Dr. Pepper. This is the most valuable tip you'll receive for Donkey Kong 64. It allows you to win before you actually play it. Wait a minute. Why would kids do that? They already bought the fucking game, or more likely their parents already bought the game. Why wouldn't they want to play it? Or were they insinuating that Dr. Pepper was a performance-enhancing drug? Can they say that? Is that legal? Ah, well, Donkey Kong 64 proved to be a success for Nintendo and Rare, although it would be the last Donkey Kong game developed by Rare, as they would be acquired by Microsoft in the early 2000s. So, did they end on a high note
Alright, good bit.
with Donkey Kong? Well, considering it was a critical and financial success, I want to say, just looking from the outside, yeah. However, I've also heard from different parties through the years that Donkey Kong 64 was a major factor in the 3D platformer dying off at the turn of the millennium.
That's an interesting take to make. I thought the problem with 3D platformers is that they were oversaturated and too many people were trying to reinvent the wheel. I thought that was the major issue. Stuff like Super Mario 64 that controlled well were the exception by my understanding.
It's quite an interesting contrast, and after today, I guess I'll finally see the whole picture for myself. But for the sake of total transparency, to give you guys an idea on my position heading into this game, though I haven't played Donkey Kong 64 until this video, even I know that, especially being among my friends who have played this game in some fashion or another, this was a rather contentious game for different reasons. But among those reasons, the most consistent one I've found was fully completing the game. And I know it's a safe assumption.
What do you mean by fully completing? Because my understanding is that this is Nintendo's MO, especially with Donkey Kong Bonanza recently, where the game itself, or at least the core experience, is relatively easy, but then if you want to go full completionist, that's when it ramps up. So, was that the case here as well?
Anyway, that's the main reason why a lot of you are looking forward to this video. You guys were wondering if I was gonna go out of my way to fully complete Donkey Kong 64, because I can only assume the game isn't very interesting outside of that? I didn't know how to absorb that. Is this game only notable for what's required for 100% completion? Is it perfectly playable when you're not getting everything? Given my prior history with being burned by 100% completion, is it even worth fully completing Donkey Kong 64?
No.
No.
Nope.
No.
No.
Not at all.
Why am I here?
No.
Okay, good bit. I was thinking, okay, you got a lot of people on board with this. Okay, you've got a very specific pattern going on. Okay, got good comedic chops, I'll give you that.
No.
No.
Yes. Oh wait, no. I mean, no.
Again, good comedic chops, well played.
Oh, fuck me. Well, I'm gonna do it anyway. Shit, it's my first time with this game. It's my first 3D platformer from Rare. Might as well start with a bang.
Well, I guess the question is, how difficult is it, and is it difficult for the right reason? Because there's actually another video on the subject by Fringy, who had a similar, had some interesting thoughts on going full completionist with, I think it was Crash Bandicoot 4. I think it was the newer one that came out a few years ago, where there was a lot to dissect with it, and it was, well, it could be satisfying to go full completionist, but as you spend more time with the game, you start noticing a lot more of the cracks in the armor the further you go down, especially as you run the same thing over and over trying to perfect it in the case of a platformer. So, to some extent, those who go full completionist and really dig into it actually come away with a more positive experience than the guy who just plays it normally and doesn't worry about getting every last nook and cranny.
As a heads up, I'm also going to be emulating my time with it. I own the game in all of its banana yellow glory, and I did play for a bit on original hardware, but my Nintendo 64 loves to crash with just the slightest fucking breeze. We're on the occasion where I accidentally shifted just a centimeter because I forget how short the N64's controller wire is. I figured since I was in this for the long run, work smarter, not harder.
Yep, that's fair.
Emulate it. And who knows, maybe with the help of cleaner graphics, more stability, the occasional save state to help save time, maybe I'll enjoy this.
Maybe. I mean, you say maybe. You keep setting this up as if it's going to be a big deal, so, when's the other shoe going to drop?
Maybe it won't be so bad.
When's the other shoe going to drop?
But just in case.
Do I need to go and fetch a drink real quick? All I've got on my desk is a bit of water. I probably should have refilled this before I started.
Okay, here we go. Donkey Kong 64. A drink to celebrate the occasion. God help me.
Okay, hang on. If that's vodka, what the hell are you doing? That was more than a shot. You're gonna be drunk if you actually do drink that. Are you okay? Okay, I mean, you're clearly not, but whatever.
You know what though?
With how you've been setting this up, but we'll see.
Well, I can already say this is a good looking game with great sound too. I love this little intro that plays right before you're taken to the main menu. It's kind of a dick move for Donkey Kong to throw a barrel at me just for making a selection, but DK is here to show you that he's back and large and in charge. Before any of this though, the game opens with the DK rap.
This is where it comes from. I think that makes sense based on what I recall of the franchise, because I think I have this track from Smash Bros, but still.
This was something, believe it or not, I was first exposed to in Super Smash Bros. Melee.
As was I.
They remixed it there for one of DK's stages, and I remember back then I was like, what the fuck is this shit?
Yeah, I still think that. I mean, I can live with cheesy soundtracks for a bit. I think it's the F-Zero medley that they have on Smash Bros, where it's a Japanese singer for whom English is not his first language, singing in English, and I can't help but smirk at it, which probably a little mean, but at the same time, I sat there going, "Oh, you're doing your best, man." I'm not sure I would have the same opinion if it weren't. Well, either way, you get the point. I can live with cheesy, but the DK rap is a step too far for me.
It's just incomprehensible noise.
What?
The original song is from this game, though, and it's cheesy and about 10 years too late by 1999, I want to say. But I find it pretty endearing. It's a good introduction of the whole DK crew, how they play and what kind of obstacles to expect. But holy fuck, 5 playable characters. It's a Donkey Kong adventure, which means this video is probably going to be a marathon. I gotta talk about all these assholes, don't I?
Oh, so that's why the video's 48 minutes, huh?
Donkey and Diddy Kong were back, but the rest were brand new faces. Tiny Kong, the sassy girl who could shrink in size and float for a bit. Lanky Kong, the orangutan with stretchy arms and terrible gas problems. And Chunky Kong, the strong one, which I find out because Donkey Kong is described as being stronger than before, but apparently not strong enough. Can't even pull a basic ass lever without drinking a steroid cocktail from Cranky here. So did they add
Wait, I have questions, but okay.
a whole other Kong to make up for DK's apparent lack of strength? You know, I would have thought they'd bring back Dixie and Kitty Kong. I mean, a defining trait with Tiny is that she can use her hair to float for a bit, prolonging her jump. That's Dixie's stick, so why not just bring Dixie back? Maybe you can argue that Kitty Kong is less significant, granted, but I think he could have been what Chunky ended up being. A super strong Kong that was also a total chicken shit. I mean, even think about picking him in the character select, and he's already filled with anxiety.
Alright, so at least a decent amount of character for what you have.
I just find it strange that they aren't even given a passing mention. Not from what I can tell anyway. Going back to the graphics though, a lot of Donkey Kong Country's aesthetic translated very well in the 3D. But it is certainly more cartoonish than before. The sound design is also full of a lot of Saturday morning slapstick, as if this game was directed by Hanna-Barbera.
And you say that like it's a problem.
Assume this is a holdover from Banjo-Kazooie because I recall that game rocking a similar vibe, going off what I remember through osmosis throughout the years anyway. It works for Donkey Kong though. It
Yeah,
did
that's what I
remind
would
me
assume.
of Gex 2 on the occasion, and whenever you enter a new world for the first time, how the camera flies through the level to get yourself familiar with it, I kept thinking to myself, holy fuck man, this is just the Gex 2 opening. Wow, widescreen option in 1999 no less. How very progressive for Rare. I thought the inclusion of Star Fox Adventures was something. I played the game in standard, just to be clear, but it's cool that Rare was even thinking of players that had TVs that would eventually become the standard.
Huh. Interesting how that worked out. Huh. Is this going to be a dev interview explaining that?
The soundtrack this time was composed by
No, it is not. All right. Never mind me.
Grant Kirkhope, making it his first and I think only time he composed an original soundtrack for Donkey Kong. I don't count the conversions he did for Donkey Kong Land 2. And like the graphical presentation, this too is more cartoonish than previous soundtracks. If I wasn't already aware it was made for this game, I would have easily assumed it was made for a Banjo title. It's pretty bouncy and fun, but doesn't contain the same atmosphere and moodiness as what David Wise and even Evelyn Fisher composed for previous games. I still liked it, but it doesn't exactly fit my Donkey Kong Country vibe. Nothing immediately stuck to my head, even after spending considerable time in these worlds, which I think is saying something considering how fucking long. Okay, we should probably get things started.
Oh boy, we're going to be here a while, aren't we? Although, I'm starting to run out of commentary, though, because a lot of this is more just, this is the thing, here's critique of it. And this is what I was worried about approaching this. I don't know if I'm properly transforming it. Let's see. What's coming up on the transcript? Is there anything I can dig into?
You know, I always thought that Donkey
Alright, so what have we got coming up? It looks like there might be something.
Kong Island being in the shape of Donkey Kong's head was something that started in this game. And would you live in an island that was in the shape of your head? There's something very Twilight Zone about that. But when I go back and look at the island's original look in Donkey Kong Country, no, it's also shaped like his face there, but I don't think it's as obvious. But still kind of makes me feel stupid not realizing it until now. But in the outskirts of the island, King K. Rool once again approaches in his sailing fortress. Yeah, he's got a whole fucking fortress on a boat this time. He'd do well in Wind Waker. The Mad King is through putting up with Donkey Kong shit, so on top of kidnapping DK's friends, he's also planning to wipe out Donkey Kong Island with a huge ass cannon. Holy shit, just blow the whole thing up. Talk about using a more direct approach. They
And of course, you gotta bring the final smash in. I guess that's a reference to this.
really amped up how sinister King K. Rool can be in this game. He always had an air of intensity in the other games, only counterbalanced by the antics he suffers at the hands of the DK crew, but in this game, shit, they give him a deep-ass voice.
I want you to do everything in your power to keep Donkey Kong
Okay, that sounds like one of the orcs from old Warcraft. What the heck?
distracted.
Actually, it might be. Hang on. Now I'm kind of curious. I'm not gonna go look it up right now, but that seriously sounds like something you'd hear from an orc on an old DOS game.
Kill that horde of golden bananas he treasures so much, and take care of his pathetic friends. This time there can be no mistakes.
The first thing we hear out of his mouth is his Darth Vader-like breathing. They keep him out of the camera's view for a bit to play up the mystique, giving him this whole Dr. Claw from Inspector Gadget vibe, and he's such a dick to his goons too. King K. Rool ain't messing around. His minions are still as incompetent as before, but the man himself is pretty intense. I like this iteration of the guy, and I'm glad he's gone back to his king attire instead of whatever the hell this phase was.
The heck is that? Huh. Okay.
But somebody please get my man some fucking Clear Eye for his one eyeball. That shit is just out there. It's like one half of his face is normal and the other is going through a coke-induced rage. The cannon, fortunately, needs time to charge, so Squawks the Parrot rushes to warn DK that the king has returned, and he's kidnapped all of his friends. And so after learning some of the basics thanks to Cranky, who's taken an interest in the sciences for some reason, we all have our hobbies, especially after your...
Yeah, I'm just running out of things to say for this. I think I'm gonna call it here. Let's see. Yeah, because the problem at hand is that it's because I haven't played this game, I can't necessarily speak with authority on anything regarding it. I think you can see just the sheer contrast between this and how I approached the Fire Emblem Engage video, where there can be some intrigue because it's a complete newcomer looking in, but because it is a complete newcomer looking in, my gut instinct is to be quiet and listen in to see, okay, so what's this game about? What's the big deal? What sort of approach you're taking? And so, because of that, I feel like the only substantial commentary that I can provide is based on editing choices and presentation, more so than I can for anything substantial. So, yeah, I think we'll call it here. Sorry in advance to the person who recommended this, but I think this is where we'll call it. If you want me to dig into it further, well, send a timestamp for if there's anything in particular you want me to look at next time around. There's plenty in the backlog now that we can dig into if we so desire. Either way, so, to give a quick update, I'm doing this a couple days before I'm doing this a couple of days before when it's going to be going live, but as of right now, I'm going to be fairly busy over the weekend because it is Labor Day weekend. I've got family who will be visiting soon. I think I've got about an hour before they show up, actually, so this timed out perfectly. So, that in mind, we'll see. Let's see, is there anything important that needs to be mentioned? So, I guess next week is going to be a little different. The reason why we've been doing React content for the last 2 weeks instead of continuing with Deltarune is because for the moment, we're going to be leaving Deltarune to the side. It wasn't what I had planned, but, well, as has likely gotten everywhere on the internet by now, the Silksong is indeed real. So because of that, I've decided that I will be streaming it when it comes out on the 4th. So as soon as I get back from my day job at that point, as soon as it's downloaded on my computer and all that fun stuff, I'm kind of surprised they haven't let me pre-order it yet. Hang on. So, is there even a price on it in the... Not even a price on it yet. Interesting. So, really surprised on that. It's unlocking in 6 days and you're not letting us pre-order? I don't know how I feel about that. To be fair, they'll want to make sure that they send out codes to the Kickstarter backers, as I think that they had promised that at some point, because I remember that being announced a while back. But either way, so my thinking is that I can't go full bore with Silksong because I've got a video that's more time sensitive that I'm working on for the review channel that ideally should be out before September if I wanted to reach the audience and be useful to the audience I'm aiming it at. And because of that, I need to keep focus on that and can't dedicate my every waking hour. Otherwise, I would bust it out for a release stream next week and then just spam it on the game dungeon just constantly. That'd be my approach to it. But because I do have a time-sensitive video on the review channel, it is instead going to take over the streaming schedule here. So my plan then is that anytime I have a free evening that doesn't need to be thrown at video editing is going to be spent on Silksong. That's my plan as of right now. So what that'll mean is that the Saturday time slot will absolutely be used for it. And as for the rest, if I've got a free Tuesday, Thursday, or if I want to eat into the time my brother and I spend playing Pokemon on Friday, we'll see how it turns out. We will see how it turns out. I'm hopeful that I'll be able to play it 2 or 3 times a week, and I may be able to sneak it in occasionally on a Sunday morning, but I don't know if I necessarily want to go that all out, to be fair. But still, I'm not going to be super rushing it, but I am going to want to go through it at a quicker pace, and I'm willing to even have a break between Xenoblade 2 and when we resume the Xenoblade 3 playthrough, if it should come to that, which, given the size of the map, probably will. So, I will be very curious to see how that ends up working out. So, that's the plan as of right now. As far as the rest is concerned, let's see, the Xenoblade 2 stuff shall be carrying on apace. The last video for that will be going out September 19th, so we've got, I think, 3 weeks left at the time of upload. Yeah, basically. 3 weeks left, and then that's sorted. Any future Let's Play stuff will happen at the Game Dungeon channel. So, either way, I think that's all that needs to be said. Thank you all for stopping by. Hopefully this was entertaining for you. It was certainly entertaining for me. It gives me a chance to talk about Fire Emblem, and when I haven't had much of a chance outside of just the few moments that I can squeeze in with this, with the review I'm doing. Hopefully that'll also give a good taste for what I'm going to be doing with this thing as well, but even if it's not going to be fully done for a long time at this rate. Still, either way, we'll see how that turns out. For now then, thank you all for stopping by, and I will see you Thursday for Hollow Knight Silksong's release. Till then, take care.